It was after midnight, and Cruz's wife, Heidi, had woken up to an empty bed. Leaning up, she found her husband sitting in a nearby chair, his face illuminated only by the glow of his phone. "Ted," she said. "What are you doing? Come to bed." The senator made no movement, save for the swipe of a finger on his iPhone screen. "Hold on," Cruz distractedly told his wife. "I am in a Twitter war with Jimmy Kimmel." Unbeknownst to his wife or the staff of his re-election campaign, the Texas senator had fired off a tweet to Kimmel after he caught a clip of the late-night host making fun of him. In a monologue the night before, the left-leaning comic had suggested Cruz's beloved Houston Rockets had lost the NBA playoffs to the Golden State Warriors because the senator showed up in person at Game 7. Sharing with viewers a photo Cruz had tweeted of himself courtside, Kimmel had mocked the senator's attire, the super cool t-shirt over a polo look, and said he strongly resembled a blobfish, a slimy deep-sea specimen that has been described as the ugliest animal on the planet. "The new Rockets mascot," Kimmel declared. Unsurprisingly, this did not sit well with Cruz. Recalling the clip a few weeks later, as he sat in his official campaign RV, the Cruiser, parked outside a restaurant here where he was to meet with voters, Cruz offered a tight smile when asked if he thought Kimmel's jabs were funny. "I laughed, sure," he said, a little unconvincingly. "But I also got a little ticked off. I decided instead of getting angry, I would have fun with it." In Washington, he has tried to shed his image as an impertinent conservative bomb thrower, a gadfly to Democrats and Republicans alike. If you killed Ted Cruz on the floor of the Senate, and the trial was in the Senate, nobody would convict you, Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, a fellow Republican, once joked. Though he has not wavered from his strong conservative views, Cruz has lately tried to carve out a more congenial presence in the Senate, sparking talk of Ted Cruz 2.0, as his fellow Texan Senator John Cornyn, who has butted heads with Cruz in the past, put it to the Dallas Morning News earlier this year. Cruz has begun working more closely with party leaders like Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, whom he once publicly branded a liar. And he has tried to repair frayed relationships with other Republicans, by hosting dinners and a regular pickup basketball game in the Senate gym. "I am a mediocre player, at best," Cruz said. To the shock of some of his colleagues, Cruz recently went so far as to try to hammer out legislation to permanently end family separations along the U.S. border with Mexico, with Senator Dianne Feinstein of California, a Democrat and ideological adversary who has repeatedly clashed with the Texas lawmaker in the past. Negotiations between the two are still ongoing. "Ted and Dianne working together," a Democratic senator remarked to News Pulse News. "Has hell frozen over?" But it's Cruz's presence on the campaign trail that seems more different than before. Though the lawmaker disputes that he's made any changes to his campaign style, arguing that his past reputation was more media caricature than anything, Cruz has a noticeably softer presence compared to when he was barnstorming Iowa, South Carolina, and other early primary states in pursuit of the presidency during the 2016 election. Absent are the dramatic pauses and flourishes in his pitch to voters that often made Cruz sound more like a fire and brimstone preacher than a political candidate. On a recent campaign swing through East Texas, his stump speech was riddled with self-deprecating jokes and pop culture references, including lines from The Simpsons and The Princess Bride, his favorite movie, which he often quoted during his White House run. And while he went after O'Rourke, assailing him as a socialist who would lead Texas and the rest of the country off a cliff if elected, his attacks were delivered more often with a smile than a sneer. If it's true, it's by choice. Polls in recent weeks have shown a tighter than expected race where, in theory, Cruz should be walking an easy path to re-election. No Democrat has won a statewide election in Texas since 1994, one of the party's longest losing streaks in the nation. Polls suggest the race is still Cruz's to lose, though it's closer than many would expect in a conservative state. A CBS News/YouGov survey released last month found Cruz with an 8-point lead over O'Rourke, 44% to 36%, with 13% still undecided. While Cruz is right that Trump will be a major factor in Texas, a state that has been caught up in the intense debate over immigration and where farmers and manufacturers have been hit hard by the president's trade war with China and threats to throw out NAFTA, the senator's ability to turn out Republican voters will likely depend heavily on how they feel about him too. And that's where it gets tricky. According to the Tribune poll, only 17% said they remained neutral to Cruz. It isn't just Democrats whom he has a problem with. Polls suggest he is also struggling among self-described independents, moderate Republicans, and female voters, voting blocs that O'Rourke is working hard to turn out for him and could prove pivotal in a race that is expected to be the most bitterly fought and expensive in the country. Among other things, the congressman has attacked Cruz for his fiercely anti-immigration views, including his support for a border wall and his opposition to protections for Dreamers, people who immigrated illegally to the U.S. as children. Cruz has decried the practice as amnesty. The recent crisis on the border has only further cemented immigration as a major issue in the race. In a widely covered protest along the border, O'Rourke called the separations torture and un-American. Initially, Cruz had defended the Trump administration's decision to separate children from their illegal immigrant parents when they were detained on the border, saying the U.S. was merely enforcing federal law, while calling the images heartbreaking. He said parents breaking the law shouldn't expect their kids to accompany them to jail, no matter the crime. So when you see reporters, when you see Democrats saying, "Don't separate kids from their parent," what they're really saying is, "Don't arrest illegal aliens," Cruz told KARA, a Dallas public radio station on June 11. But after a week of controversy and a visit to a border detention facility, Cruz reversed himself, introducing legislation that would keep immigrant families together but double the number of judges along the border, bringing the total to 750, to speed up asylum requests. While the bill was criticized by Democrats on the grounds that its 14-day limit on adjudicating asylum pleas was too short, it was received well by Republicans in the Senate, who have long been divided over the issue of immigration and were desperate to solve the escalating political crisis. But Trump shot down Cruz's bill in a rambling speech in which he called the proposal crazy and exaggerated what exactly it would do. He suggested the Texas senator had proposed hiring 5,000 or 6,000 more judges. Thousands and thousands of judges they want to hire. Who are these people? Trump declared. We don't want judges. We want security on the border. While Trump ultimately signed an executive order ending his administration's practice of separating families, Senate Republicans have sought to pass a narrow measure that would effectively put that policy into permanent law, which is what Cruz and Feinstein have been negotiating. In an interview, Cruz sidestepped questions about Trump's criticism of his bill or working with a president that often acts more like a frenemy than an ally. Speaking to voters throughout his tour of East Texas, he talked up his proposal on judges and his efforts to bring consensus on the issue, though he made no mention of Trump's opposition or his ongoing negotiations with Feinstein on a permanent solution to family detentions. It was not hard to see why. Voters in attendance, while friendly to Cruz, hammered him on issues of border security. They demanded to know why construction on Trump's border wall had yet to begin. And several asked why the U.S. was spending money to house immigrant children while there is an epidemic of homelessness among military veterans. Why can't we just throw them back over, a woman in Sulphur Springs said, referring to immigrant families who have crossed the border illegally. Cruz answered by saying that the best way to end the crisis was to deter illegal immigration. Echoing Trump administration talking points, he argued that many of the kids being brought to the border were not in the custody of their parents, but under the control of human traffickers who were abusing them. No one who cares about compassion, who cares about humanity, should want to see kids in the custody of human traffickers, Cruz said. Now how do you stop that? The way you stop illegal immigration is you enforce the law. You send them back home. You don't let them stay. He attacked O'Rourke for his more liberal views on immigration, accusing his opponent of favoring open borders and supporting the abolition of the Immigration Customs and Enforcement Agency, known as ICE. Under pressure from his own base, O'Rourke said last month he is open to the idea of abolishing the agency, but later dialed it back to suggest he would abolish the practices of ICE. Cruz called it a radical proposition and seemed to throw the congressman's words back at him. That may be popular with Democratic voters and radical activists, he said of O'Rourke's views. But that's not Texas, that's not America, that's not what we believe. Cruz's efforts to rehabilitate his image aren't aimed at winning over Democrats, but squarely at Republicans, especially Texas Republicans. Many Republicans in the state were angered by Cruz's early years in the Senate, when he seemed to be focused less on Texas and more on his ambitions for higher national office. Elected to the Senate in 2012 as part of a wave of Tea Party conservatives, Cruz quickly thrilled his supporters by taking on President Barack Obama. He was the driving force behind the 2013 government shutdown aimed at trying to undo funding for Obama's Affordable Care Act. It wasn't about the shutdown. It wasn't about the Affordable Care Act. It was about launching Ted Cruz. Tom Coburn, a pork-busting conservative who represented Oklahoma in the Senate at the time, later told The Washington Post. 2 years later, Cruz no longer speaks of running for president, but he has pointedly refused to say he won't, telling Texas Monthly earlier this year that life is long. Still, on the campaign trail, he politely brushes off voters who ask him during meet and greets if he would run again someday, telling one woman that he is solely focused on the election at hand. But that hasn't kept O'Rourke from trying to use Cruz's lingering ambitions against him, depicting him as an out-of-touch lawmaker who is more interested in the White House than in Texas. Since launching his campaign last year, the congressman made a point of visiting all 254 counties in Texas, a feat that Cruz has not done. He's barnstormed every county in Iowa though, O'Rourke told supporters during a rally outside Arlington, Texas, earlier this month. And some Republicans even wondered if Cruz wasn't thinking bigger last month when he met Kimmel on the basketball court at Texas Southern University in Houston. After weeks of negotiations and rule-making that rivaled the NBA, the Texas senator and late-night host battled it out in what Kimmel had branded the Blobfish Basketball Classic. On the sidelines, Cruz's advisors cheered. Before the game began, Jeff Rowe, his longtime political advisor, had declared him the winner no matter the results, saying it allowed people to see Cruz in a new light. Funny, engaging, self-depreciating. Cruz got a trophy and a talking point. On his tour through East Texas, the game was the talk of every stop, mentioned by amused voters who questioned if his dribble game was really that bad, and by Cruz himself as he relished a win over a liberal Hollywood foe. With a few months left to go in a campaign for his political future, Cruz was looking for any victory he could find. For the next 50 years, Hollywood liberals are going to give Jimmy grief, and go, "How on earth could you lose to Ted Cruz?" the senator told voters at a stop in Longview. "It's the gift that keeps on giving."